Good afternoon, and I am delighted to welcome you to our professional development session today. Again, I'm going to invite you to go to slido.com, and when you get there, the session is CeL PD4 to answer the question, share something you know about how the brain learns, and you can put as many responses in there as you like. So our session for today is part one of a two-part. It actually has the potential of being a lot more than that. Two-part session on the schedule at this point for brain changing. Did you know that you are in the business of being a brain changer? And our moderator today, our host, is Gabby, and she has placed a message in the chat room. You can certainly post a comment in the chat room. You can raise your hand to if you want to add in, and we certainly welcome that. And I have Dr. Carlton here with me, and so he may be joining in the conversation as well. So, so Gabby is your personal concierge for the session, and she will let us know if there's anything that we need to share. If you want to share anything, so you can chat, and and she can unmute you if you want to raise your hand to speak. So what we're going to be doing today, I'm trying, and I will show you in just a moment, the reference that I am using on this, but I have discovered a new book put out by ASCD on connecting brain research, neuroscience, with understanding by design. And it is, as I've read through, a logical connection between those two things. And I felt like it was some really important information that I wanted to share. So we're going to talk about some of the updated brain research that's out there. Take a look at some basics, educational neuroscience 101, very basics. We're going to take a look at the overview of understanding by design, and take a look at, try to get into some of the goal setting strategies. I've made it seemed like I might have a lot going on in here. So we'll see how that is going to work. But the way this book does is it starts out giving you the basics and how some of the current information on neuroscience, as well as then it has a chapter on the basics of the UBD, Understanding by Design, curriculum design framework, and then goes through the rest of it in chapters talking about activities and things that we do that make those connections. And that's what the second week is going to be, is how we're going to be able to make those connections. So I am going to take a look at the result on the Slido. So let me move us into that brain changing. And this, let me move this over. Okay, and it's not showing up for me in my. It's supposed to be a little word cloud, and I'm not. It's not showing up that way. So someone has put down the three principal parts: the stem, cerebellum, and cerebrum. New connections in the brain cells, visual. I think the brain learns through repetition and practice. Mirror neurons to learn physical motions and routines. Interesting. Moving through several types of memory involves neurotransmitters, absolutely. Receiving information and then encoding it into long-term memory. And happens during sleep. That's why my memory would be better if I got more sleep. You know what? I hadn't even thought about it that way. I love that. And so we've got, we have several that have commented on the repetition part of it. So thank you. And you're welcome to continue adding to that. And I will be sharing those results when I, at the end afterwards, I'll share all of the results with you. So let's go back to our main screen. So you've made some comments about how the brain learns. What is it that made that information stick in your brain? So that you had something to write down on that. So I'm going to invite you to either raise your hand to speak or make a comment. And Gabby, comment in the chat room. I don't know if I can see all of the chats as they come in. So let me know if anyone wants to make a guess as to why those things have stuck in your brain. I love the comment about that being a part of when you sleep, but that works. That works. Anybody else? Okay, love it. Any other comments? We're going to talk just a little bit about it. So Judith, mirror neurons, just so weird. And so Judith, is that, are you in nursing? No, okay. I thought that might have sounded like it might have come from a nursing background. Okay. Neuropsych, okay, yeah. And it's, brain research has been a fascination of mine for quite some time. And we're going to look a little bit about some of the background on that. So I'm going to move on. If anybody wants to make any comments or put a comment in the chat, please feel free to. And of course, you're welcome to speak up too. So this is a photograph that I took of the book, and it's Jay McTighe and Judy Willis, Upgrade Your Teaching, Understanding by Design Meets Neuroscience. And it's an ASCD. Right there. It's an ASCD text, or not text, book that is fascinating. It really is. I was drawn to it because it combines two things that I am very fond of and very interested in. So let's take a look at some of that information. So think of yourselves as cognitive contractors. In order for our students to be able to get the information that we want them to get, we have to lay it out in a way that's going to make sense. So we're course building, and some of the basics on that is that our brain continually seeks patterns in order to make predictions. And I know that the brain seeks patterns. I hadn't made the connection with the importance of making those predictions, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So the way it does that, as new data comes in, it goes through all of the things that are stored in order to see where they can connect that new data. In the book, they referenced both Vygotsky, which we know, the scaffolding and the creating the network so that new information can be linked to. And this, by having it linked in, it's a more efficient retrieval of the information, because random information, what I typically have referred to when I've talked about it, can be basic, like trivia. And it's a little bit harder to pull some of those random bits of information out. But if the new information that's coming in is connected to something that's already a part of one of your neural passageways, then it's easier to pull it out and when you need it. And as the brain does this, continually goes through this process, as they make more accurate predictions, then it continues to go in that passageway. And what was really interesting to me is that those accurate predictions create a dopamine release. And that's one of the things that the brain seeks. It seeks the patterns, it also seeks the pleasure. And the pleasure is that dopamine release. And so if it makes a successful and accurate prediction, then that will be more likely to go on and make more of those predictions that way. Kind of interesting. I felt like. So our brain is a 3-pound organ sitting up there on top of our head, and yet it consumes 20% of the oxygen that our body has, and the nutrients. And none of the cells in the brain retain oxygen or nutrients. So there has to be a continual input of those things to the brain. And consequently, that's one of the reasons it looks for the patterns, is to be more efficient in producing putting the information together, because there's not a store of nutrients, there's not a store of oxygen, and so it has to be efficient in how it uses what it has. I thought that was kind of an intriguing way of looking at it, and something that I hadn't thought about. I knew that it used 20% of the oxygen and the nutrients that the body receives, and I knew it was more or less 3 pounds, but I hadn't made that connection with that piece of information. So one of the things that I kind of thought someone might put on our Slido chart had to do with neuroplasticity, and this is one of the things that has been relatively recently. The research on the brain is all relatively recent, within 20 plus years, because up until the time of being able to examine living brains, which was when they developed the fMRI, the imaging tools, that they'll be able to study the brains while they are learning, and how they are while they are doing what they're doing, and see how these things interact. So up until then, they were only able to study cadavers, and so there was no way of really knowing. They knew the basic shapes and where the things were, but not how the cells interact. So this is a diagram of a brain cell, neuron, and it's the information comes in from the dendrites, goes through the cell, and then is passed down through the axon to the terminals, to send that information, to create that neural passageways. And this small diagram shows that the information then is transmitted across the synapse to the dendrites of the next cell, so that creates those neural passageways. The idea of neuroplasticity is one, because up until they were able to really realize that, the assumption was that our brain cells just continue to die off, which many of them do, but we can still recreate those new neural passageways as we continue to grow and use our brains. So it's not a matter of losing what we have. It's just a matter of creating new neural passageways, which is another really fascinating piece of it. So the whole neuroplasticity piece is one of the things that is a way that we use and store memories. So here's our Educational Neuroscience 101. The amygdala, which is a very small almond-shaped piece, or two of them on each hemisphere of the brain, and this is where information is processed. Excuse me. and as the data comes in, it goes to the amygdala, which then decides whether it should go either to the prefrontal cortex, which is where we plan and where we think and where we do the executive functioning, or into the brain stem, which is where we get the fight or flight responses. So within the amygdala is where it's determined whether that the data that comes in needs to be go to the prefrontal cortex to be processed and sent into long-term memory, or whether or not there's there's a threat of some sort. And so the brain is designed to be safe, to make the body safe. So something that is perceived as a threat would then go to the brain stem to be processed there. And so the hippocampus is the gateway for all of that information to come in. And so looking at it from that perspective and thinking about the amygdala, and when I first started doing, when I was first introduced to brain research and the use of it in education, I heard the term hijacked amygdala, which would be when there's threatening information seemingly coming in. Now, way back, that would be, if we were in prehistoric days, that would be if there was a lion chasing us. But the stresses that come in, the threats that come in these days are not quite that strong. So let's take a look at some of the fact. Well, actually, I'm going to move down to the next one first, and then we'll go to this one. So the some of the factors that cause stress in that amygdala these days have to do with isolation, feelings of being isolated, if there's not any personal relevance to the information. Now, we think about it as far as terms of the students that we have, but some of this information, if you think back to, or if you have kids in the K-12 environment, some of the responses that teachers see, both in K-12 and probably in higher ed to some degree too, that we would look at and perceive as, being distracted, not paying attention, but some could be based on some of these other factors. If there's been frustration from previous failures, if there's the fear of being wrong, if we have people, and we hear this on a regular basis with test-taking anxiety, if there's language differences, physical differences, dress differences, that would be perceived as a threat, or just that feeling of being overwhelmed. So all of these are things that cause stress now, and then cause the brain to not be receptive to information that's coming in because of the stress coming. So it's there's a lot more to that than we think of. So some of the things that reduce stress, and we're going to be taking a look at a lot of these as we look at the other parts of this book, but giving them choice, novelty, having things coming that are different, different approaches. One of the reasons that we reference a variety of assessment tools is in order to provide that novelty for them. Other things that help reduce those stress is story. And as teachers, we are always storytellers. We move through that process and relate things in a way that make a story out of it. Positive interaction with peers. So those, yes, indeed, those collaborative teamwork projects where they can interact with each other and help learn from each other. Kindness and optimism are stress reducing factors, and especially achieving challenges. That's where, when the brain has made those correct predictions and releases the dopamine to reward the brain. So there's those comments, those ways of making it happen. Now, let me see. Okay. And so some very basic information, and there's a lot more both in this book and in other resources that about how we construct that memory. Memories are not held in a single neuron, but it's the pieces of a memory are stored in various places in both hemispheres based on the modality. So, and something that comes in with multiple sensory modalities is going to be stored in a variety of places, but it also is going to be more likely to be able to be retrieved because of that variety of different ways. And that's kind of the basis of that dual coding theory. And so storage within the brain that's based on the patterns. Remember, we said sending the information to finding something to attach it to that makes that connection, makes that pattern, allows us to provide them with ways to access the prior knowledge. So it's important as we're bringing new information in to let them know what kind of prior knowledge, where that's going to connect, and what they need to be able to, how they need to be able to connect that. And that leads definitely to transfer of information, and that's going to move us into some of the information from understanding by design. So let's take just a moment to think about, now you're having a better idea of what it takes to be a brain changer. So I'd love for you to put something in the chat, raise your hand and speak up, and share some of the things about being a brain changer. Any comments? I know you're jotting all kinds of stuff down. I can see notes going on over here next to me like crazy. So anybody want to share? Okay, you can go in the chat or you can raise your hand.
No responses.
No, not that I'm using analogies. Yes, Linnell, absolutely. Remove the stressful things.
I do it from layers. Build a foundation, then I add
Uh-huh.
another layer, then I build it, then I add, and I keep going to move them through a progression.
Yes, yes, yeah. And that's exactly, that's the Vygotsky idea of scaffolding, where we put those layers and then give them a protected coating around it so that they can start to test things out.
I make sure they're comfortable at that one layer,
Yes.
and then each layer, I make sure, and then they repeat those as the
Uh-huh.
building of
Uh-huh.
the layers.
And that's exactly what solidifies it. Pieces stored in multiple ways, like packing a bag and grabbing stuff from different rooms. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, add more music. Sure, definitely. That is a key thing. That's one of the sessions that I had heard at a brain teaching with the brain conference, actually quite a while back. So, Linnell, is that a direction where we might be heading? Helps us understand how we learn and memorize things, but how our students are affected. And and I'm glad, Laurie, I'm glad you mentioned that, because once I had started learning about the brain research and the impact on education, and I was at that point teaching science for K through 5. And I included a brain unit at the beginning of each year for them, so that they had they had some idea of what they were doing and what we were doing to make sure it was going to work for them. Yeah, ease of communication. All the different rooms that you're grabbing stuff from, the music room, the story room, the emotion room. And by the way, when emotions are connected to an event, a memory, it is much more likely to go into long-term memory. Yeah, stress reducers. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Abilities to share. Yeah, thank you for your comments. These were all some excellent approaches to it, and I appreciate that. Anything else that anybody wants to add in? And thank you for putting the items in the chat room so that I can see them. And know, of course, that if you want to speak up, you're absolutely welcome to. So, yes.
Christina said, "Good afternoon. I insist to the students to see the lab exercises before coming to the lab and after lab, of course, for the quiz. By then, they have seen it 3 times before, during, and after the lab. These are layers on the brain, and it reduces the stress when studying for lab practical."
Excellent. Absolutely. Thank you, Christina. Yes, definitely. Yeah, multiple opportunities for success. Judith just mentioned that. And that is indeed how that works out. If they've had access to the material, can review it, and then they're more comfortable when they get into it and just take some of that stress off. Excellent. Thank you. So now what we're going to do is take a look at, yes, stress definitely impacts learning, definitely does. And when you think about it in terms of some of the stress things that our students have dealt with, as well as students in the K-12 environment, it definitely has an impact on learning. And if we don't recognize that some of those things are a part of what's going on, we just have the perception that, well, they're off in la la land again, and that may not be the whole story. Yeah, trauma is definitely a great impact on brain danger. Thank you, Gina. Yeah. So now we're going to take just a quick overview look of the understanding by design process and how that really is the basis for this whole book, is how it's aligned to brain-based education. So this is going to be a quick overview and to get a perspective on that. So, and it seems a little redundant to say teaching for understanding, because for goodness sakes, isn't that what we all want in the first place? And yet so much of education is more focused on rote learning, rote memorization, and that really doesn't include any real deep understanding. So when there's meaningful learning taking place, it supports that transfer, because one of the things that we want to be sure that, and that's what the Wiggins and McTighe understanding by design is. We want them to get that information, but we also want them to be able to take what they've learned and apply it in a different situation. So multiple opportunities to apply the learning, and providing them with authentic context ways of sharing that information. There's the research, which I have found fascinating. I discovered it a few years back, and try to stay focused on that, as well as some of the research on expertise, and the difference in the way experts take a look at a situation as opposed to novices. So as experts, and all of you are experts in your field, when you step into that classroom, you bring your expertise into that classroom, and you have that overview perspective. You focus on the core concepts, the big ideas, whereas our novices are still at, and let's talk about the Bloom's level, still at those basic levels in Bloom's, which is foundation, certainly, but we all need to have that. So the novices want to focus on the basic perspectives, on let's say, for one of something else, definitions, or how can I apply the procedure to it. And so thinking about the assessments that we want to look at when we're teaching for understanding needs to be a variety of assessments. Quizzes certainly have a place in that, but quizzes have more of a focus on memory and getting a grasp of the facts. And so we want feedback and assessment pieces that focus on understanding. And we've just had, I've had a couple of conversations recently about the performance assessment, authentic performances, authentic assessment, ways of thinking differently about the topic. So that's the rationale for thinking about understanding and how we teach for understanding. Understanding is certainly as an overall goal for by the end of the course. We definitely want our students to understand these things, but as a module level objective, we don't have any way of showing evidence of understanding. But, and again, the Wiggins and McTighe understanding by design give 6 facets of understanding. And that's what we talk about within, when we're working with you on your courses, is using some of these smaller pieces to build up to that understanding. So that's where I am. Okay, so the understanding by design, the Wiggins and McTighe basic format for curriculum design is based on 3 stages. And we try to do everything within the Center for E-Learning based on a format for those stages as well. So the first stage is to think about the desired results, what it is we want them to come away with. And then stage 2 is what's the evidence that's going to show us that they've identified those results, that they've accomplished those objectives. So the evidence would be what they are going to actually do to show us that, yes, they have understood that, they have accomplished this, they have done that. So those would be the activities, the assessment pieces that you put into your courses. And then stage 3, once we've figured out what we want them to accomplish and what they're going to show us to make sure that give us the evidence that they have accomplished that. That's when we then plan those learning experiences and plan the instruction. And one of the Understanding by Design text reference what they refer to as the twin sins, either the habit of thinking I've got to get through this textbook, the coverage, we're going to do this, and this, and not thinking about it in terms of a real understanding. Or the other side of that is, oh my gosh, I found this really cool activity that I think we're going to do. And I don't know if it's actually, I don't know where to fit it in. I don't know what it's going to accomplish, but they're going to have so much fun doing it. If it doesn't accomplish one of our objectives, if it doesn't give us evidence that they have learned something, that they're understanding in the process, then there's not a whole lot of point to it. And that's why this is also referred to as backward design, because most people think of it as doing it in a backward way. It really isn't. It's much more logical, but that's the perception of it. Okay. All right. So, and I had an example I was going to give you, and I'm not sure now where I was going to do it. But so we're going to jump right in and start thinking really quickly about goals and the need for setting goals and figuring out what we need to do to accomplish them, because goals are the drivers of learning. And our brain, we're going to bring the brain stuff back in with it now. Our brain learns best when there are goals and objectives, and it knows why we're going in the direction that we are going. So some of the curricular goals, being able to set goals within as we're building our curriculum. Certainly, we want to have goals for the knowledge base. We want them to. There's a lot of information that we want them to know. We also want to set goals for them for the skills, the processes that are a part of the topic, the curriculum. But we definitely want to develop goals for understanding, to be able to have clear opportunities for them to show that they do understand the information, because then we can start thinking about the goals that we use for transfer, because being able to take the knowledge that they've gained and adapt and use that knowledge in a different situation is what we have truly understood. There is solid understanding that way. And what's interesting is that it's also cross-disciplinary, because you can have goals that help us accomplish something, and that's part of the transfer too, being able to take the information and adapt it into a different perspective. And so clarity in those goals is what is extremely, extremely important, to be able to clarify, to let them know, as Dr. Carlton said, he gives them the basics foundation, and then builds on that, and then refers back to it, so that they know. You can help them identify where that information is going to connect to. So, and one of the tools that they suggest, and this is going back to K-12 as well, but it also works for all of us, has to do with the KWL chart. what I know, what I want to know, what I want to learn, and what I have learned. So I am going to invite you, and since this is part one of a two-part, I'm going to send you the KWL chart and let you let me know what things that you want to learn more about in this field, so that when we meet again next week, we can address all of those things. So the KWL, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is the K is what I know about the given topic. The W is what I want to know, what I would like to learn more about. And then the L is after the finish, when you look back on what I have learned. So I am going to let you go back to the Slido. I have to open the other one up. Let you go back to the Slido and answer the next question, which is the third part of the KWL chart, something that you have learned today. And I'm going to take us over to that. Again, it's slido.com, CEL PD4. And whoops, it did not, there. Now the second one is now open for you. The third part of the KWL chart, something that you have learned. Okay, and while you're posting, these are going to come up as like the conversation bubble. Okay, and I just saw a really nice comment from Lori. So when we go back in, Lori, if you will open your mic and share that with all of us. Something you've learned to remove the stress, thankfully. Identify, yeah, and we probably all know that, because we know when something gets to us, whatever else was in our head at that point has left, and yet we don't think about it in terms of the learning and the little things that we don't really think of that are bigger than we actually thought. That novice and experts have different ways of seeing the same content. Yeah, accurate prediction causes dopamine release, and I had heard that. I just hadn't. It didn't sink in until I was reading it multiple times in here, and those accurate predictions keep leading to more, which is what it's trying for.
And we're the facilitators of that.
Uh-huh.
As the cognitive contractor.
Cognitive
And I didn't think
contractor.
of that as me creating that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And that's really, that's part of the whole bottom line here. We're in the business of changing brains. And that's a pretty, number one, it's awesome, but it's also a pretty intense task there. So it's
short amount of time.
yes, a very short, way too short. All right, so we're reducing stress in our lives. Thank you, thank you. Join whenever you're whenever you're about that, being able to laugh with others and it myself. So I want to sit in on that one too. Oh yeah, the understanding by design. Yeah, and I'm glad that was something new for you. And what I'm looking forward to is sharing in next week's about how those parts work together, the brain research and the understanding by design tools. Yeah. Nice, excellent comments. I'm going to invite you to continue posting on there, and I will again send all of them out. Oh, love music. Different music has different impacts. Look at that. Yes, a stress reliever. Excellent. Thank you. That must be Lori's comment. since she references that the students are listening, usually listening. Yeah, it amazes me how many people we see going along with the headpiece out. Okay, I'm going to take us back, but please continue adding in here and I will share all of these with you so that we can jump in. And thank you for sharing. Yes, I will definitely be sending the PowerPoint out. And I'll also be sending out your very own copy of the KWL chart, so you can let me know which direction you, if you have any ideas. The complexity of the brain and its functions. Yep, it definitely, it's a pretty amazing tool there.